Hi everyone, welcome to Women Health Matters podcast. And on this podcast, I have amazing guests who give us lots of information on different nutrition, foods that you need to eat, healthy exercise, financial help, or just support with your mind. And I also run a consultancy for women who are struggling with menopause. And if you'd like to ever have a chat with me or anytime, it's free. All you should do is give the link. It'll be in the little box at the bottom. So today I'm joined by an amazing guest, and I have done some of her courses online through acupuncture and the amazing universal process. And it's again something that I offer to women to help clear things that are going on in their systems. So today I'm joined by Kath Berry. Welcome to this podcast, Kath. Sorry, I get my words muddled up here. Welcome, and can you tell us what you do and introduce yourself?
Thank you, Lucy, and hello everyone listening today. See, my name's Kath Berry. I'm an Australian acupuncturist now living in Ibiza in Spain, a little island off the coast of Spain. And I'm a mother of two. I have a daughter who's 9 and a son who's 10. And I'm just recently divorced. So I'm on a personal journey through womanhood and understanding what it's like to be a single in my mid-40s. On top of that, I would say I'm officially in my perimenopause, and that's what's inspired the writing of a recent textbook, which is for other acupuncturists. It's not for the general public, but it's called Menopause, a comprehensive guide for practitioners. And so, Lucy, it's so wonderful to be on your podcast. I've listened to many of your shows, and you've had some incredibly inspiring women. And I just wanted to, again, thank you for your time as an acupuncturist helping women and upskilling in learning how to better help people in practice, either in face-to-face or online. So I think it's really wonderful that we're now living in an age where we can help more people just through providing diet advice, through providing lifestyle advice, and also just being a helping hand, somebody to talk to during really, really tough times.
It's true, actually. And I think we're both acupuncturists, and traditional Chinese medicine is your background as well as mine. But I think a lot of people don't really understand about what acupuncture is. They just associate it with putting in needles and pain. And it's actually that's a very, very small part of Chinese medicine. There's an awful lot more involved in this practice.
Indeed, and I think this is one of the things, the book that I mentioned has been 4 years in the making. And one of the most extraordinary aspects of that is realizing the interplay between so many things that we do. The most striking for me, in fact, was the role of exercise. I had, you hear all the time, eat well, sleep well, good diet, good food and exercise. But what my colleagues and I who've written the book went through the process of understanding the science behind all of those activities. And that was probably the most critical aspect for me, was understanding the role of exercise in wellness and cardiovascular health, looking at things like hot flushes and the incidence that can be reduced with a really constant and rigorous exercise regime. And probably more importantly than anything else is the role of exercise in mental health. I think that was the most extraordinary piece of information to just see. We know this, but what's lovely is when you start to explore the science behind, and really all it really told us is that it is so important to follow that what in Chinese medicine, the Yang Sheng principles. Yang Sheng is 4 legs of a chair. That's eating really well, diet, nutrition, and of course, as a consultant, you can provide that information for somebody online. The other leg of the chair is making sure that somebody's sleeping really well. We're so wired to look at our productive selves and our energetic selves that we sort of really focusing on the value of sleep. The other aspect is mental wellness and movement. So the idea of mentally staying well in terms of making sure that even things, I would go so far as to look at the company that you keep. More recently, I've been really inspired to go and listen to podcasts from inspirational teachers from the last century. And it's fascinating how there's repetitious themes come up. And one of them is if you want to be a happy person, surround yourself with happy people. And I think that that's a really interesting life choice, is to start looking at your friendship groups and who you're spending time with in terms of looking at your own mental wellness. Could that be being influenced by other people's stress or other people's addictions, other people's inability to cope? And maybe it's a time for a bit of a social review on who's coming through that menopausal transition versus who gets left behind in a former life. So it's one of the lovely things, as you say, Lucy. Chinese medicine is so broad. It's an entire system of approaching life and wellness, and that as clinicians, that there's every single tool available to really maximize women's outcomes.
It's true, actually. It's very interesting you said that, the 4 legs of the chair, because I use that a lot on my masterclass, my perimenopause masterclass. And I always, with the mental health, I always put in having fun and curiosity again, because as I don't know where we lose it, but you've young children. I have a young daughter. I have 2 older ones, but a young daughter as well. But it's her curiosity in the world, I think, helps, because they always say young children keep you young, but I think it's the curiosity of young children that keep you young. It's like looking at in their little nooks and crannies at spiders, or some flower that they've seen, or if you're driving along I remember my friend's little boy saw the sea for the first time and he couldn't believe all that water. It's just that joy of living and learning again. And I think we lose that some way in the seriousness of earning a living and having children, and maybe having to be, I think a lot of women who have kids suddenly have to be very serious and lose their sense of humor in a way.
It's such an interesting observation, and I know it's one of the key themes of a lot of motivational speakers is always looking at reframing. How can we take a situation and reframe it so that it's not a positive or a negative? For a lot of people, it's a really negative. We're programmed to be imprinted on the negative. It's the negativity bias. And really what we want to be looking at, and this is really critical for menopause, is actually how can we reframe this as a really positive experience? So, for a lot of people, it's tied up in our society. It's tied up with the aging process, which already has these inbuilt stigma attached to it, that somehow aging is associated with pain, is associated with losing of certain things. And this is where I feel that there's a lost opportunity to really look at how can we reframe this as all the things that are gained in the process. And one of the most critical things which we see, particularly in women in politics, women in power, women in roles of influence, is this real ballsiness that comes through. And in Chinese medicine terms, that this is this real yang energy. We're looking at yin and yang. And women are traditionally yin, and they're very passive, and they maneuver through life and let their male counterparts, who are very yang and very masculine, take the lead. What we see in these menopausal years is women starting to step into their power. And it's something I'm really fascinated by, because I also think women's power is very different to men. That men find power through being very loud and being very confident and being very, very sort of, extroverted. Whereas I think women's power can sometimes be very introverted, being very organized, very methodical. And it's just fascinating to see that menopause, I think, is the greatest opportunity for women to shine. That this is the chance that often the children have grown up, so that their time has become more available, that they've got all these skills from being a parent or being a mother or juggling life and work. And that really the menopause is this clean opportunity to start this new phase. The listeners today might be aware of what's considered the gates of life theory. It's a fairly strong theory in the Chinese medical framework. And that is that we have these very distinct gates we go through, and puberty is one. Puberty is the first major gate. For women, there's a second gate of pregnancy and childbirth. And so for some women who do choose to have children and go through pregnancy and childbirth, that they're entering into this new field into their gate. And then the third one for women is menopause. And so that this is this opportunity of saying, a little bit like puberty, it's this time of rediscovering who you are, who you're passionate about, what drives you, what you find disgusting. That this is an opportunity to really come alive. And Lucy, I love what you're saying about being curious. Give yourself permission to reevaluate everything that you once thought. And my particular interest as a woman, as I mentioned, I've just recently gone through divorce, is having to sort of re-enter into society as a single woman and rediscovering sex and dating and exploring sexuality. And it's this, almost sort of feeling like a teenager again, going, oh my goodness. And, it's really fun and it's challenging, because, with online dating, it's really confronting because it's, you're quite literally having to promote yourself with photographs and these, biography where you're putting your wares out. I had one Tinder date the other day say something like, if that's part of the stall that you're putting out, I was thinking, oh gosh, is that what we've become? We're sort of all little market stalls, and we're displaying our wares and having to just understand that dating in the year 2022 in your mid to late 40s is a really different experience as a teenager. But I say that with this absolute wild enthusiasm, because it's, really appreciating the other aspect that I've learned. I mentioned exercise being a really critical aspect of a healthy menopause. And in fact, sex and sexuality is another big one. It's a really big part. I said, what's been your experience working on your online consultancy with your perimenopausal clients?
That sex seems to take a back seat quite a lot for them. They don't have the energy, and they don't feel that they are valued enough within their relationship. It's become mechanical. It's just a process that they do. And lack of energy, I think, is a huge, big factor that comes into this. So what would I say to my patients is, if you'd gone away with your husband for a lovely, or your partner for a couple of weeks, you probably spend the first week sleeping, but the heat of the sun and closeness of your contact with each other rekindles that flame that's there. And you'd be surprised, you start holding hands, you start feeling more relaxed, you start feeling that he's looking into your eyes again and connecting with you. And then that, because again, it comes down to that hormone estrogen. Now there's estrogen comes in lots of different, there's estrogen, just one word for different types of estrogen, but it comes to that hormone that we want connection. And when we get that from our partner, then sex becomes enjoyable again, because you feel close to the person. I think that's what happens, even if you sit on the couch kind of on top of each other again, like you did when you first started dating. And I often see women that are like, there's no way I could do that again. First of all, they're very conscious of their bodies. They may have gained weight or had cesarean sections or breastfed, so they don't look the same. And, they're ashamed of that element of themselves. So they won't, in all fairness, men really don't care that what you look like. In a way, they just want to have sex with you. So
and I think there's so much to be said about women reclaiming their sexual energy, so that it not just as even sort of sexual intercourse, but this idea of being sexual beings. And one of the things I get disturbed about being in the menopause area is how acceptable it seems to be. It's like, well, I've lost my libido and I'm not having sex, but it's like I'm very tired from sex, and there's an expression, this is one of the back in the early days that I would hear a lot from my clients, saying, I feel dead from the waist down. And the trouble with that is, being organic beings, is that we're made up of material like the tissues, which require constant lubrication and constant activity. So if you imagine the vaginal canal and all the genitals being like any other part of the body made up of muscle tissue and circulation of blood and fluids, is it needs exercise. And this is, there's a wonderful expression which I use, which is use it or lose it. And this is where things like vaginal atrophy, which is this drying, shriveling, shrinking of the vagina, and then sex becomes painful. So it sort of then perpetuates its own sort of lack of interest. But one of the things I would say to all women is just keep that fire burning. And even if that means on your own. So again, people like myself in a divorce who may not have a partner, is don't rely on one. That we're in the year 2020. There's the most incredible opportunity for sex toys, masturbation, for being able to, really make an effort of keeping that sexual energy alive. And I think that there's a little bit of a misnomer in the idea of like that you're going to have this fire of be really turned on by looking at somebody. I think we can put that to the first gate of life and say that shit probably sailed in puberty, and that we're all adults. We need to get practical. We need to understand that things take work. And that with a lot of my menopausal clients, I'll say things that's a little slow to get started, but I get there in the end. And that's a really important message. It's don't, often nobody genuinely feels like going to the gym. but you know when you leave the gym, you're going to feel terrific. And that's a little bit like jumping into the sack. You know, it's like you don't necessarily have to be super into it to start, because you know the benefits are going to be all the way along. And there is a lot to be said about penetrative sex or penetration generally, whether that's with a sex toy or with fingers from somebody else or yourself, that really making sure that everything is being well used. And I've got this wonderful expression, I call it sexercise. You know, thinking like sometimes even if you don't feel like having sex with somebody, it's like you do your sexercise, because if you don't, then the opportunity is taken away. Then things like the vaginal atrophy does set in, and it just becomes more problematic to reverse. So it's, you know, I really feel strongly about saying to women is don't be okay about being okay about not having sex. You know, it's just there's sort of, obviously you know, I encourage all women to be incredibly autonomous and really sure of themselves, but not to let that slide just because it's somehow considered normal and acceptable for women over 50 to lose their libido, and that's okay. Just as a little, you know, physiological aside to that, is that the clitoris is actually made up of very similar erectile tissues as a penis. Mm-hmm. And so what we often see is, you know, that we understand that men get erectile dysfunction, you know, as they age, and hence, you know, medications like Viagra that came along to resolve some of those symptoms. Women have the same. It's exactly the same. We get erectile dysfunction, and because the clitoris and all the internal structures aren't seen, you can't actually see a woman not being able to get it up. So therefore, it's often just sort of more broadly called sort of sexual dysfunction, when really, if you just understand that it's just not getting an erection, and having to look at the ways to encourage blood supply, ways to encourage arousal, whether that might be listening, watching, reading, you know, being more, as you say, curious, you know, that curiosity of a child, but applying that to adult interests, and that sex and sexuality is a really big part of pleasure and happiness and feeling good. And, you know, it's private, and it's something that I think should be encouraged more for women, because it's, you know, not only is sort of menopause a little bit taboo, we're talking about the very dark recesses of menopause is about pleasure.
Hugely never talked about ever, and it is massive. It's huge. It is huge because you know, some reasons are, you know, as you said, they feel dead from the waist down, they don't like what they look like, they have no energy, they can't be bothered, haven't done it for so long, why would you bother? But it is that connection back to yourself, really, and self-love, and understanding that it is a physical need that you do need, and there's nothing to be ashamed or embarrassed about, actually.
And to me, it's like an appetite. You know, it's sort of be, you know, imagine a whole bunch of people walking around going, I've lost my appetite, therefore I'm not eating. You're like, oh, there's an eating disorder, we need to fix this, and we need to, you know, resolve this. And so I sort of see it as the same. And the only difference, obviously, is that one is about survival and the other one is about pleasure. But I feel like that's something that it's, I just feel sad that we accept that women will lose their sense of pleasure, and that's okay. You know, I just feel like why are we being told that's okay? Why is that acceptable? And again, if you know, look at how much activity has gone in around making sure that men retain their sexual bravado and their sexual prowess, you know, all the way through their life, you know, I feel that that's something that women should have, and it's an equal opportunity for sort of, you know, for sexual pleasure. And it's, you know, the funny thing, you were talking about sort of the sexual confidence, and it is really interesting, online dating. And I sort of see something like an app like Tinder it's like speed dating yourself, you know, really understanding what you're into and what you're not, and what upsets you and what doesn't, and where your needs are and where your, you know, rejection sensitivities. And it's the most, you know, fascinating exploration in your own identity. Or that's what I've experienced. It's been the most fascinating exploration in my identity to go into these apps and sort of see. So the other thing with understanding menopause is women, everybody's in all these different situations. There's people that are single by choice, single not by choice, in long-term marriages with people that they may or may not still have emotional feelings for. So there's, you know, all these different variations of how somebody might be transitioning through, all with its own sort of elements of complexity. one of the things we are seeing is that there is a more increased rate of STDs in women in their late 40s and 50s, because people are divorced, they're going to apps going, well, I'm not fertile anymore, so therefore there's no more need for contraception, and as a result we're sort of seeing a rise in these other problems. So it's like every solution we have creates more problems, and every problem has more solutions. So it's an incredibly interesting area, and obviously I want to make it clear to people listening that there isn't obviously a one size fits all. It's very much around personal situations, but just almost doing an audit and saying, which parts of my life am I happy with, which parts am I not, and what can I be doing about those?
It's very true. So I would have separated from my ex-husband in my mid-30s, and I would have thought at that point, I had my 2 kids. I was lucky I had my 2 children. So it wasn't, and I was quite young. I was 30. Well, it's young now when I think about it. By the time I thought I was ancient. It's funny, isn't it, where you get different concepts of time. 34, and I thought that was it for me. I'd never meet another person again. I thought I was too old, past my prime, past everything. So it really does affect you when you are in a long-term relationship and move on. And I did consider online dating, and it was one thing, about a year later, my mom, she was like, it's about time you put yourself back out there. You're a young woman. And I was like, Mom, really? I was like, I don't need to have this conversation with you. But she was right. And I started going back out again. I wasn't interested per se in meeting anybody, but I just started going out and having fun again. Fun for me. And on a night out, that's when I met PJ. And I wasn't intending on meeting anyone. I was just, as I said, it was about me. And I think that's really important when you're recently separated, or you're getting your head around the situation, to make it back about you again and nothing else, just looking after you. And yeah, it was, having sex with another person again was very daunting. I was thinking about online dating. We didn't get that far, because I luckily met PJ in the street. It was funny the way I met him. He knew my friend, and we started dating. Didn't think it was going to go anywhere, just used it as fun. And we're together now 14 years, 15 years, I think, and we have a little girl, so life, and it's good. And obviously all relationships have their ups and downs, but I think leaving someone is incredibly brave. It's like jumping off a cliff and really not knowing where you're going to land, but also putting yourself back out there is also very brave. It's about, as you said, stepping back into your power. And the excitement, I remember the excitement of first meeting PJ, and is he going to text me? Isn't he going to text me? Do I say this? Do I say that? And I think it doesn't change no matter what age you are. I think it's always there, an element of that excitement of meeting somebody new.
And I think what's interesting, when we think about the menopause or the menopausal years, is looking at all the other factors that are involved. So we've just talked about sex and relationships. The other sort of confronting factor is around things like parenting. And I've been working on one of the important aspects of the book for me was making sure that it was all evidence-based, so that we're making sure that everything is scientifically rigorous. And one of them was looking at the role of progesterone and estrogen. And so looking at from the age of birth all the way through life to death, what do these very important hormones do? And what's fascinating is if you ever look, and I encourage anyone listening today to Google, the progesterone and estrogen over a woman's lifetime, and what will come up is this very distinct graph of it. Sort of, we're born with a certain amount, and then during puberty, you get this sort of incredible wiggly woggly line of it going up, and then it increases up into the reproductive years, and then there's an equally wiggly woggly white line, and that's perimenopause, and that's as estrogen and progesterone are decreasing. And I was looking at these wiggly lines and thinking, this must be a joke, that humans are designed that at the exact same time that you would have teenage kids and menopausal women, thinking like, wow, there's these long episodes of stability in our lives, but the two most sort of volatile happen to occur in the same house at the same time.
Yeah.
And thinking, isn't that just sort of a trick of nature to sort of put all these, that as women are discovering their own identities, they're in the household potentially with other people doing the same. So, it's really made me understand how these confounding factors are. And then the other look at that is where aging parents fit in. That often menopausal women are caught, they call it the sandwich years, stuck between raising sort of teenagers to adolescent to sort of late teens. And then, right when it looks like the children are about to leave the nest, the parents become more dependent. Either that's through illness, immobility, or through a palliative care dying process, or sudden death, and that
sudden death or a loss of one,
a loss of grieving, and so again, looking at these wiggly lines of chemistry and thinking, oh my goodness, if that's the symphony that's playing in the background, and then a life event happens, like losing a parent, or caring for a parent, or having some sort of set of circumstances that you can really understand why women do find it stressful. That it is a combination of all these social factors. Notwithstanding, on top of that, for some women, losing confidence is a big part. So working in the workforce, often it's around the age that women are more likely to be promoted. So there is this sense of being given more responsibility. So workload, rather than decreasing, starting to increase. Or the paradox to that is some women getting sidelined, is that they've reached the glass ceiling, that they've come to this point where they're finding that they're putting the same amount of work in and they're not actually getting traction, and they're sort of being sidelined by younger people, generally men, coming through. So, what it means is in the workplace, in the home, within their bodies biochemically, within their social structure, within the family. Often it's responsibility of the women to take care of the parents if there's siblings involved. So, you're looking at all these different factors. It's not just the biochemistry, but it's within the social construct as well.
So for me, when I'm learning something new, for me to actually understand how to implement the changes in my life. Say for example, eating gluten-free. I understand that gluten clogs up your system and doesn't allow minerals and vitamins to be absorbed correctly into your blood, creates different, bloated, constipation, pain, those type of things. So I understand that really helps me understand why you wouldn't have gluten in your diet. But say for scientifically, for something like that, when you are dealing with menopause, teenage children, or elderly parents, scientifically, how does that come into it?
Look, to be honest, this is where I think, things like your online consultancy, being able to help women sit down and map out all of the factors.
Yeah.
What is, because I think often we don't even get to say that this is a problem. It's even just being able to, on a piece of paper, draw out which of the things that are bothering me the most. And I would always encourage anyone that's really struggling is to reach out and get help. That there's this wonderful, services like your own is being able to say to women, it's just giving a framework of, okay, let's meet every week during crisis time, meeting every week, maybe once a fortnight, maybe meeting once a month online, mapping out a diet plan, mapping out an exercise plan, mapping out a strategy to cope with all these different things that are going on. And really, one of the lovely things I learned from Chinese medicine is name it to tame it. That is that until you work out what the problem is, you cannot work out what the solution is. So the process of just simply naming what are all the factors that are at the moment creating a feeling of stress, and then what bits you start to prioritize. What bits do we have power over? What bits can we control? What bits, for a lot of the stress that people are suffering, it's like we need to, looking at what time are you going to bed, and how much sleep are you getting? Because as we all know from having young kids, one of the greatest things that can really, really throw you out in your coping capacity is not sleeping. Just a couple of nights sleep, and of course, with all the wiggly woggly lines that are going on with the progesterone and estrogen, that things are being thrown out chemically. So then looking, it's like, okay, things need to change. For me, one of the biggest ones, and I say it without any judgment, but alcohol is a huge one in terms of if people can eliminate alcohol, then what they're doing is they're taking out a big chemical influence out of that roller coaster. So again, it's being able to say to people, I understand drinking is a great relaxant. It's great socially. It might be an avenue for having sex with somebody. So, therefore I can understand its role in making people instantly feel good. But on the whole, alcohol is just one to avoid if you really want to start getting really stable biochemistry. So, looking at what you can be doing more of, and then looking at what you shouldn't be doing much of. And so, really starting to tweak all those different variables and saying, but I think that the ultimate thing is that it needs to be led by a professional like yourself, because it's not something I think that people can do on their own. It's like trying to, captain a ship at storm, during a storm. You really sort of need all the different bits of information to be able to understand how to navigate your way through. And that's a really important part of having a team of people, and certainly having a lead clinician on board, someone to check in. And what is often the way is there are episodes of it being really challenging, of needing lots of help in lots of consultations within a month, and then 6 months of cruising, and then all of a sudden something kicks off again. So just understanding that look, this might be a 5-year journey. Find someone that's going to accompany you on it, that's going to always be around, always be available, and have this high level of knowledge like you do.
No, it's true. And it is really about how your thoughts and how you feel in your head really have a massive impact on your body. And say, like with sleeping, if you don't sleep, well, in Chinese medicine, actually, they say you can't make healthy decisions when you don't feel healthy. So like sleeping, if you're not sleeping, you wake up, I call it a sleep hangover, because you just don't feel yourself. You wake up with a sleep hangover, you're not running on 100% power, you're running on maybe, depending on how much lack of sleep you've had, say 80%, and you just can't think straight. Your words don't come quick enough, you can't concentrate. You're just a bit like behind the times.
And then often people then either binge on chocolate or have an extra cup of coffee. So then you sort of try and stimulate yourself in this sort of quick fix junky food way. And then the paradox to that is then you're getting home and you're really wired, and having a glass of wine to calm down again. So it's sort of offsetting this kind of like chemical ups and downs in the process. And it's, I agree, it's really just looking at all the different components that make up a healthy lifestyle, and then working out which bits can you do and which bits are reasonable to do now. What can you do right now? What can you do today? What can be done this week? And then over time, the most important, I think, is repetition. So it's not just eating a healthy meal. It's eating continuously healthy. It's not just giving up alcohol for a week. It's cutting it out entirely, or it's this idea of just building in sort of a pattern so you can get this over time benefit.
Absolutely, I agree completely. And also, I think sometimes if you've been really, really good, you're good, you're not drinking, you're eating healthy, but you go out with a bunch of friends and you have dinner and you eat dessert and you have a glass of wine. It's to really go out and enjoy that, and not to feel guilty, because the effects of feeling guilty are worse on your body than enjoying yourself. So I think you have to, and if you've had as one of my clients said this morning, she went excuse my French, an F it week. I'm not going to say the word just in case. She goes, F it, I'm just going to eat it, because, and if you're going to do that, relish it, like eat it with passion.
And it's funny, I just listened to a podcast the other day it was love yourself as if your life depends on it. It was actually an audio book. So it's a book that has been turned into a podcast. But I loved that idea. This idea that the most important relationship in the entire world is the one that you have with yourself. And so, for all of those things, Lucy, that idea of be kind to yourself if you've had a hard time, be compassionate to yourself if you lose your rag and scream at your kids, or you're just constantly trying to check in with yourself and love yourself first, because that's where everything else follows. And I do think it's really important when we're raising kids, and you said also raising girls, it's really important to model how you want your daughter to relate to herself, and that's through this kind doing your best and holding just making good decisions, and then even the doing things, if you understand that the dessert and the glass of wine, if it brings you pleasure that's of value, then that sort of has its own place as well. So it's such a, isn't it, aren't we lucky to be in this area of Chinese medicine and menopause and this growing body of knowledge and also, understanding that women now are more empowered than they ever have been. Women are now more financially independent, have the financial means, and have the sort of educational prowess to be able to strive for influence. I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, I've been diving into all these inspirational leaders from the 19th century, from the 20th century, and the 21st century. The idea of all these themes that have been coming up, Napoleon Hill, Alan Watts, who was a lovely Chinese medicine practitioner who sort of first brought Zen Buddhism to the mainstream world. And what's really fascinating for me is how many of them, the same themes have been recurring, for the last sort of 100 years of wellness. And it's really just starting to think. And the only difference that I've really noticed is that they are men talking to men about men's wellness. And I'm like, where are the women in all of this? And, where are the women? Where's the women? And there's a wonderful speaker. Her name's, I've just got to remember her name. Oh, Florence Scovel Shinn. And she wrote this book in the 1960s called The Game of Life, How to Play the Game of Life and Win. And I thought it was really interesting because it's also around being very mindful and setting manifestations as in manifesting. And it's wonderful. But one of the other things that's very striking is it's very feminine. It's very much around how to attract a very good husband. I thought we sort of need to use this opportunity to find our voice as women. And again, I'm exploring these areas of power, of women showing up, of women in this later phase of life. And I think one of the challenges that women face is that we live in such an ageist society, is that women, I believe, have a lot of power in society because of their sexual energy and they're sort of showing up. And what we see in menopause is women, as we talked about, feeling like they're losing that sexual energy, that women now feel sexually invisible. And as a result, they feel socially invisible. And to me, there feels like this sort of gaping hole of how do women re-enter back in this very wise, very influential, very much highly revered role, as we often see more in Eastern cultures, that older women are considered unbelievably valued and influential in the East. Whereas in our Western societies, it's sort of sidelined, as past it, so to speak.
By date type of thing.
Yeah, past myself so by it. And I sort of feel like, we're on this incredible cusp because there's a whole bunch of very powerful women coming through.
I think it's changing. I think we'll see it with. I think we'll see it particularly with my youngest daughter. She's 10, so I think life is changing. I think when I grew up, it was very much girls should be seen and not heard. You can't be too good. You can't excel too much because you'll upset the man in your life. That's very much the way I was taught, but it's very much the way my mother was taught. So it was breaking that barrier. And I'll give you an example. Like my little daughter was chatting, because like the phones are hilarious. So she's got my phone and she was chatting to her friend on the phone, and her friend just never said goodbye, just hung up. So she rung her back and she couldn't get through again. And then she rung her back late, or Priya rung her back later, and she hung up on her again. So she sent a message on Facebook Messenger going, Priya, I don't like the way you hung up on me. And her mum was telling me, and I was like, oh, I could have to tell Amber she can't say those things. But actually I didn't. I held back and I was like, do you know what? That's Amber in her power saying that she didn't like something. So then her friend messaged her back and said, oh, I'm so sorry, Amber. I never said, it's a bad habit I do. I just hang up the phone without saying goodbye. So it was a complete misunderstanding with two people. But I am so glad I didn't intervene and tell her she shouldn't do that, because I think that's something that I would have been told, not to be rude, not to be seen and not heard type of thing. Whereas she stepped into her power, and this was something she didn't like, and she did something about it. So I think the generation of younger girls are going to change because of the changes we're making in our lives.
And I would love to acknowledge all the women that have come before us to give us the position to parent in this way. I'm just thinking that what this lovely long line of,
and all of those,
that's right. That this sort of long line of of influential women, and so listening to anyone listening today, I would sort of encourage you to think of like what can you be doing to be an influencer in your life, whether that's immediately within the family, immediately within the local community, immediately within society, but just that sort of showing up and having been confident and and really using this midlife episode as an opportunity to say it's this gate of life, and walk through it and recreate, with the curiosity that you mentioned, Lucy, and with this power and with this opportunity to really step into the new version of yourself and what your future looks like.
I think that's really good. I think that's brilliant and I think influencing people doesn't have to be on a massive scale. You don't have to be online. You don't have to be doing big talks or podcasts. It's just, as you said, in your little community. If you influence one person, you've done an amazing job.
And I've got a lovely friend here in Ibiza who said something. She goes, I love getting old. I can just be who I am. And I just thought, wow, isn't it interesting to think that it's sort of that age can be authenticity, that it's sort of, that you actually just grow into yourself, and that, she's in her 60s now, and she's just got this incredible, I can just say F it, as you said, everything. I can just be myself, and I don't have to worry what anybody thinks or does. I'm thinking, wow, how liberating, and what a wonderful opportunity to take advantage of that and make that who you are.
It's true. And I think that comes with age and maturity a little bit too. But I think if we can show our younger girls that you can be okay in your own skin, I think that's important, that you don't have to follow the trend. You don't have to, be like the little clones of them walking around the place, that you can have your individuality. You can be that too, but you can be an individual as well. I think that's an important message, and I think that's something that as we age, that comes into it. It's a bit like that expression, you can't put an old head on young shoulders. But I think you can teach them, and as you said, influence them in their lives enough that they realize that self-love is very important.
Well, again, anyone listening today, I think, if you are struggling, it is wonderful to know that there are people like Lucy that can help. That's just not to struggle alone. That the consultations are completely private. That there's an incredible body of knowledge. So much so I've just written a 500-page textbook teaching other acupuncturists about that. So just really, I feel like I'm in a strong position to be able to say that there are solutions to every problem, and it's just finding a good match with somebody who has the knowledge to help through that process.
That's very true. Kath, you've been a really inspirational guest, and you've brought up so many amazing topics that don't get talked about very much. I thank you very much for that. And just to let everyone know as well, I'm actually now a Dutch hormone tester. So if you need your hormones tested to find out where you're lacking, if you are weak in progesterone, or your estrogen dominance, or your cortisol is high, all of those can be tested from the Dutch test. So again, I'll leave the link there at the bottom, and you can contact me and we can do that for you as well. Kath, thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Lucy. And thank you again for all the other guests on your episodes. It's been such a pleasure listening to Women's Health Matters. Thank you for your podcast.
Thank you so much.